Oh, it's been forever since I've been able to get YouTube to actually stream from my office. So the fact that it's actually working is a little shocking right now, and very much a surprise because I've been forced to use Microsoft Teams to record videos and post to my classes, and that is I love Teams. I really shouldn't be talking smack about it, but getting it to actually its permission structure is a huge pain, like absolute pain. So I'm actually really happy that I could just stream on YouTube. It's just easier to kind of like access these videos, and students are much more likely to watch them. Anyway, we're going with it today, and let me just go ahead and address the elephant in the room. This shirt is Jingle All the Way. This is Booster from the movie Jingle All the Way, and it makes me like so incredibly happy. I'm very much a fan of these shirts. I'm like a living billboard for them. These are Roosevelts, and especially when I'm recording for online classes, I love to sport one of my collection. I've got, I think, around like 45 designs ranging from wrestling to Star Wars to Scooby-Doo now, and these. I always hear people talk about the fact that a hobby or an interest shouldn't become your whole personality, but make no mistake, these shirts, they are my whole personality right now. So I began the class with an older video of myself doing a general introduction to online itself. And for 1010, I'm going to try to this time kind of sort of rethink a little bit of my strategy a little bit, because I've found that some of my 1010 material has gotten a little bit maybe a little bit stale. So in any case, let me just move on to the meat and the potatoes of today's discussion. So as a basic skills course, we sometimes fall into the trap of limiting our discussions to like vocational material. And I just realized, oh my gosh, is this a 1010 or is this an 1101? This is one of those things I should really go back and make double sure about. Okay, it is 1010. I thought my brain was rotting out of my head there for a minute. So I was right. I really should go back and re-record, but I'm terrified that I actually won't get the live stream to work again. So you know what? Full steam ahead. Anyway, so 1010, we fall into the trap a lot about being too focused on vocational stuff, right? And I've seen a lot of teachers do this thing where students just kind of write about their future careers and their career of choice. And I don't know, I find that to be real stifling, and it really kind of pigeonholes us a great deal. Students will burn out on that real quick. I mean, they're doing their vocational stuff in all their other classes. So, while I do like to cover workplace related communication and strategies and stuff like that, I really don't like to make it the primary meat of the class. I think it ends up kind of really slowing us down, and it just gets boring. So for the first couple of assignments especially, I'm a very big believer in the fact that unless you make a kind of contact with the personal and the inner voice, it's really, really difficult to make a writing class something that students actually want to do, which is, it makes sense. Like when you gather together a whole bunch of students in an English 1010 class and you talk to them about their experience with English as an academic approach, they're typically going to have kind of negative feelings about it. Writing is tough. Writing is not something that comes naturally for most people. And I was actually talking about this with my 1101 class the other day. Writing is not something that we teach in the sense that there is an absolute 100% correct way to do it. Like, there are obviously rules that we have to practice, and there are strategies that we want to be able to employ. But when you think about the difference between teaching a math class and an English class, there's a lot of swerve there, right? When I evaluate your writing, there's a lot of things I take into consideration regarding, whether you've done an acceptable job or not. And on that note, I kind of like to equate writing, especially with kind of like being in a gym. like, and exercising a muscle. And the students come up to me all the time and they're like, Mr. Bailey, I'm not a good writer. And I'm like, no, duh, you're in a class. And that's not a comment on anybody's intelligence. Like, if people came to my class and they could write, I wouldn't really have much of a reason to exist, right? It's strange to me that students come and they feel like that there's this expectation that, you know, they have to be good at what I'm about to teach them. I mean, obviously not, but I think what's happening is students feel that they're not where they should be, and they're very kind of self-conscious about their level of competence. And you know, this is college, you know, this is post-secondary. We've gotten out of high school, but I'm not really coming at this with very, very, very high expectations. I mean, I'm not saying that you're not capable. I 100% believe that you are, but I like to think of it more as you're out of practice. If a guy comes into the gym after being out of it, like some of you guys have been out of school for more than 10 years, right? And maybe even, I mean, obviously more than that. So I'm not going to expect a guy to go into the gym after 10 years of not regularly exercising and bench pressing in a huge amount of weight. That's crazy. He's going to hurt himself, right? So, I mean, when I say I'm not expecting a lot, it's because I have realistic expectations. So with realistic expectations, let's really temper it and let's do a topic that is typically accessible for most people and kind of sort of more on a personal level. It takes away a lot of the overhead of putting together like an academic paper. So let's talk a little bit about oppression. Now, I've been doing this a long time, and the oppression assignment is typically what I start with. And it's almost always a really, really good one. Like, I very rarely have a student who doesn't have something to talk about. And typically students can kind of just sort of relax and interact with this topic in a way that's not so unbelievably counterintuitive. So oppression. The reason I locked on to this, when I was a younger man in college learning how to teach writing, and in actuality, I didn't really learn to teach writing. I kind of fell into that later. My primary training is in the teaching of literature. I thought I was coming to colleges to teach things like Shakespeare, but most of my career has been teaching writing as opposed to teaching the appreciation of literature. So I've definitely had to really rethink my approach. But as I was learning to teach writing with my minor, I ran into a writer named Paulo Freire. Now, Paulo Freire is a philosopher. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds with philosophy yet. I mean, I know that I'll definitely do that. Sorry, I'm looking around. I'm looking to see if I still have a copy of his book. I think I gave it to someone. But Paulo Freire wrote this book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And of all the books I've read in my life, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is probably one of the most formative, at least for my teaching. It's also extremely controversial. Freire's politics are not very popular these days, but his ideas kind of still hold up really well. Freire was teaching in Brazil at a time when there was a great deal of government oppression and dictatorship, right? So what Freire encountered as he was going into like villages and small communities as he was trying to teach writing, and keep in mind, I think it was Portuguese, because I think Brazil teaches Portuguese. I'm gonna have to go back and double check all this later. I'm definitely speaking off the cuff today. But as Freire went into these small villages, he kept encountering this really weird problem when he would try to teach writing. And that was that the people living in these villages were extremely resistant to learn writing and to learn writing from the tactics that he was most familiar with. So he would come in, and these students, these people that he was trying to teach communication to, were very, very hesitant to be expressive. They didn't necessarily want to communicate their inner selves, or that was something that was extremely foreign to them, right? They wanted, and the scary thing is I see this to this day when I teach in public schools. They didn't want to express themselves on an internal basis. I know I'm getting really theoretical here, but that's just where I am today, so bear with me. They wanted to be told what to do. They wanted to sit down, write what he specifically requested of them, and be done with it. So this was a very interesting problem for Freire, because he essentially wasn't teaching them to write; he was teaching them to repeat things he was saying to them. This is a little freaky because I see this to this day. I'll have students come up to me after a class and be like, "Mr. Bailey, I don't want to write something that I make myself. Tell me what to write. Give me a very specific subject and tell me what to put in each one of my paragraphs." And I'm like, that's not writing. That's something different. That's you basically following very specific instructions. You're not really doing anything that's producing text or participating in a conversation. That's not expressive. Expression is extremely important. And what Freire came up with was this idea that the reason these villagers and these people were like this in this very dictatorial, oppressive, society is that they actually had kind of been conditioned not to think as individuals. Because thinking as an individual and kind of challenging the established view of reality can be extremely dangerous. So if the government has a narrative of your surroundings and you come up with a counter explanation to that narrative, that actually puts you in a great deal of danger. What you want to do is simply become a responsive unit that is kind of just sort of regurgitating and rehashing what has been put into you. So he calls this banking education. And for Freire, banking education is extremely oppressive. You see this a lot too when you go to a school and you're made to memorize things and just kind of sort of bark them back. Memorization is an extremely low form of learning, but memorization basically turns you into a kind of inhuman receptacle for someone else's knowledge. And you then return that knowledge on command. You become a kind of strange copy of that person. So Freire's big idea, and normally I take a whole class period to kind of sort of lead up to this point, but I'm going to jump right in because I don't, necessarily want this video to go on forever. Freire's big contribution is the idea that the reason that we have this is schooling itself. Schools themselves have a tendency to train people to accept dictatorship, to accept oppressive governments. And they do this kind of by accident. When you stop and think about a classroom, all the students are sitting in desks. The instructor is standing over them. Everybody's facing the same direction. If I say, get out a piece of paper, you're going to get out a piece of paper, right? You're basically following the commands of the instructor. And the reason you do that is because there's intrinsic threat. As an instructor, I actually have kind of an awful amount of power over you in the sense that I assign the grade that you get at the end of the class. Without my approval, you're not going to move forward in your education. And depending upon financial aid and all that stuff, you're going to lose a lot of money. So there's actually kind of a really kind of creepy power relationship between an instructor and the student. So Freire's primary theory and all of his ideas were basically structured in a way to say, how do we reduce the oppressive nature of education? How do we invite students to have a conversation with us, to become expressive, to share inner dialogue, rather than just becoming receptacles for the knowledge that we have? As an educator, my last goal should be to make a little copy of myself. That's not what I want. I don't want a whole bunch of little me's running around. That doesn't need to happen. One me is enough, right? I want to create individuals who are smarter, who are different, who have their own goals, who have their own outlooks, and it can achieve things outside of my own experience. So how do we do that? How does Freire suggest we do that? He had this whole thing about generative topics, and generative topics are things that are difficult, things that elicit conversation, that cause people to sort of challenge worldviews and to reject things that they take for granted, right? And the instructor has, in many ways, to come down to the level of the student. Like the instructor needs to be open to learning things from the student, and the instructor needs to delegate more of the instructional power to turn students into educators themselves. This is a really hard thing to do in an online environment. It's easier to do in a face-to-face because it's a lot easier for students to express themselves in a face-to-face environment, whereas online, we only really get the chance to do that in the form of discussions in a discussion forum or informal submissions. So in order to do that, we're definitely going to utilize our discussion forum. But for free air, it's all about topic. Topic is the thing that you really need to spend a lot of time worrying about, because what you're discussing is extremely important. You need to think very hard about how to have topics that open people up and universalize experience. So for me, what I've found to be one of the most generative topics over my years and years of teaching is oppression itself. We all have things that oppress us. In order to move this forward, let me define oppression for you. I'm just starting to realize just how gabby these videos are. My lectures, unfortunately, my lectures ramble, and that's just kind of like the nature of my brain, but just bear with me for a minute, okay? I'm going somewhere with this. Let me define oppression, because oftentimes as an educator, I use words that I realize not many people know what that word really means. They take it for granted, right? And when you stop and you define a word, you can really unlock a lot of potential and a lot of discussion just around the meaning of that word. So oppression, as Free Air defines it, is anything that frustrates your ability to become more fully human. Now, I like this definition because, the way that I've introduced it, you would think about, living in a very oppressive society where you disagree with the dictator, you're lined up against the wall and shot or something like that. It really doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We all have things that frustrate our ability to become more fully human. And what does that mean? Last time I checked, I'm pretty human, right? I don't grow horns. I'm not some type of other creature. So how do we become more human if we already are? Let's think about the things that make us human. For me, it's my freedom. It's my ability to move about and to choose my path and to go, on a path that is of my choosing. I know that's tautological, but it kind of repeats itself. I'm sorry, I got to stop being so philosophical. But for me, the most human thing is the ability to improve myself, is to set goals and achieve those goals, to become more what Maslow would call self-actualized, right? Those striving towards a greater version of self is the most human thing of all for me. To achieve desires, to have goals, to, dream and pursue that happiness. So something can be oppressive to me in a way that's not necessarily directly, related to someone acting upon me with force. I have diabetes. That's extremely oppressive. I would do anything to have a bowl of Captain Crunch right now. Like, I've had all sorts of really nice food in my life. Like, I've had delicious foods from all sorts of restaurants. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm going to Paris or anything like that. But it doesn't get any better than going to a local barbecue joint and just hogging out to the point that I have to take a shower to wash the barbecue sauce out of my beard. That's happiness. But nothing makes me happier than a bowl of Captain Flippin' Crunch, man. And my diabetes is like, you will die, right? And the fact that I have to carry insulin, the fact that I always have to be checking my blood sugar, thinking about my exercise versus my food intake, there's a great deal of freedom that's been taken from me in that regard, right? There's a lot of soundness of mind that's been taken from me. More than that, though, I suffer from major depression, anxiety, and even obsessive compulsive disorder. I also have ADHD. Like, I'm a wounded bird. I got stuff, right? I got stuff that's just like breaking my knees at any point during the day. Like, Dave's oppressed, y'all. So I'm sorry. So there are internal things. But I think the biggest example, people always look at me really weird when I say this, but my kids, my children. Now, this isn't to say that I don't like my children. I love my children. You know, they are the most important thing in the world to me. But they are extremely oppressive just by the nature of the fact that they're in my life, right? I've always wanted to just drop everything and go to Alaska, right? And just try to make a living for myself in Alaska somehow. I can't do that because ultimately my decisions now affect more than one person. My decisions affect my family. I work to provide for my family. I put food on the table. I provide insurance. We work together to help my children feel secure so that they can thrive and grow. So that goal and that's actually severely hampered my ability to do things that would self-actualize me. I want my doctorate, and I'm putting that off until they're at least out of the house because I can't take that risk right now. I don't want to, overly throw apart their little worlds, right? But here's the thing. On this note, oppression is very much something that I chose for myself. I chose to have a family. I chose to take that oppression on myself because that oppression itself is kind of rewarding. Now, there are a lot of very common answers to this question, which include things like money, the lack of money, although money can be just as oppressive as the lack of it. Like the suicide rate amongst lottery winners is really frightening. Like winning the lottery is extremely bad for your mental health. A lot of people don't realize that. The family itself can be extremely oppressive. I'm sure some of us have relatives that borderline ruin our lives, right? And we can't necessarily just get rid of those. Now, this is going to be the basis of our first paper, but we're going to tool around with this idea a little bit. My primary goal for this class is to get you guys to walk through the process of writing. So what we're going to start with is a very short reflection on what oppresses you. Now, anything that frustrates your ability to become more fully human, this can be serious. It can be silly, right? I have a dog that regularly poops if I don't walk him when he wants to be walked. I have to be ever vigilant on this dog to make sure that his walkie schedule is met, or I'm going to have a little doggy terrorist leaving little bombs everywhere, right? So these things don't necessarily have to be deep and introspective. They can be conveniences. My car has this big section of like undercarriage that's just hanging down. Like I'm losing parts and I just can't be bothered with it. And so when I'm driving around, it's like scraping the bottom of the road. And I'm just like, car's still running. So probably okay. But so, don't think that you have to get into this trap of it being, monumental and powerful. This can be silly too. You could consider this kind of like a pre-write. I want you guys to go into the oppression forum, which I will create today. And I want you to write up a quick 5-sentence paragraph that just lists briefly the things that oppress you. Next week, we'll introduce a layer of complication to this, and we'll start getting closer to a draft. Now, before I let you go, 2 things. This class is 10 weeks, as opposed to the regular 15 during the fall and spring semester. We're going to have to move a little bit fast through this class. I'm thinking the due date for this thing is going to be next Thursday. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to post videos Monday and Wednesday, so you'll have time. If you need to kind of fudge a date a little bit, it's not going to make me too mad, but you definitely want to get it in as close to that due date as possible because we do have to move, all right? So I'm going to introduce a complication to this idea. We'll talk about how to form this more into a complete draft on Monday. But for right now, over the weekend, I just want you coming up with a few ideas for the things that oppress you. So we are going to move a little fast in here. So be vigilant. I'm going to create the Dropbox soon, and we'll go from there. But the other thing is we're going to start having weekly team sessions. I'm thinking we will do that Monday and Wednesday around 3 in the afternoon. I didn't do it this week because it's the first week of school and I'm lazy. But what we're going to do is I'm going to create a Teams group for this class. I'll send out an invite to it. Attending the team session is not 100% required. It will be bonus. It will help you reach your participation grade a little faster. And all you have to do in these team sessions, I don't necessarily teach in these team sessions. What I do is I answer questions and I clarify things. So typically students come in, they check in, I chat with you for a minute, you get some bonus points. So if you can't attend these team sessions, it's not an emergency, okay? And if you do want to talk to me, you can make an appointment with me to have a team session. We can either go into the chat room and talk, we could do a phone call, or you can even just do a video call with me using Teams. So that as long as you contact me and we make an appointment, you'll get bonus points just by talking to me over an appointment. Okay. So Teams is open, but we'll have scheduled chats through the week. If something comes up in those scheduled chats, like a question that's really, that people are really confused about, I will address them in the videos. So you don't necessarily have to worry that you're missing anything, but these team sessions will be a really good way to get to your participation grade faster. When you respond to these discussion questions, I will go in and give you a little grade in participation. It's 12 points for the class, and I'll go in and give you like 5% of it at a time. So that means technically everybody's going to be failing this class next week because you're only going to have like 5% of the grade. So don't panic about that. Your participation grade is going to be an F until you earn all of it. And every time you participate in a discussion or come to a team session, you'll get more points. So I'm still going to have people calling and contacting me like, why am I getting an F in your class? It's okay. It's confusing. Okay. So don't be afraid ever to contact me. I'm in my office a lot. So more than likely, you're probably going to get me. And even if you give me a call, bonus points. All right. It's been a long lecture, and I promise I'm not going to always go this long. So discussion question, go into the forum, tell me a little bit about what oppresses you, and we'll work this into more of a complete draft for the first paper next week. We're going to shoot for about 2 pages when this thing is done, but I'll give you much more of an outline of what this thing should look like on Monday. I'm really excited for this summer class. I'm really excited to hopefully have YouTube working again because it's a lot more fun. You guys should be excited to see some more cool shirts. All right. Thank you very much. And see you next week. That was a good one.